Matzah Square.
All right.
You're centered.
Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem and Baruch Haba. Welcome to our advanced studies here at Congregation Mashiach Yisrael. My name is Scott Siskin, and tonight we are studying our beloved Tanya, chapter 24. Mi yiftach otana b'tefilu v'racha. Who would like to open us with prayer and a blessing? I can pray if you guys like, actually.
Okay.
As you may or may not know, we're coming to you trying part 2 this week, since we all got a little bit flooded out last week. So just wanted to say, Rabbono Shalom, Master of the Universe, you are awesome, and your Torah is awesome. Your knowledge and your wisdom and your understanding which you give us to be able to know you and to connect with you and to make the world a better place, we are truly in awe by you. We ask for your presence here tonight, that you should help us in the study of Tanya, but we also ask for your presence in this community, in this neighborhood as well. Be with everybody who has suffered damage from the flood. Please help them financially with whatever it is that they might need, and with the cleanup and everything that goes along with that. Help them to see your light in all of these things and just be with them. We thank you again for everything that you do for us. We love you. We thank you. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu le'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen, and let it stop flooding.
Amen. Let it stop flooding. Amen.
Thank you for restoring our study.
Thank you for restoring our study. Baruch Hashem. So, where have we come to from? Where are we going to?
We've come from chapter 23 of Tanya, book 1, Likutei Amarim.
Likutei Amarim.
Likutei Amarim. And we're going back into chapter 24.
That's right. Trying again. We didn't really make it that far last week. So, go ahead with that. Remember the mic's here. So, in the beginning of Tanya, the first section of Tanya, we're about to close the third section of Tanya, or about finish the halfway point here. So we're really coming up to a big, this is the moment, right? We're at the crux, we're at the precipice, if you will. The crescendo, thank you. So in the beginning of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe tried to explain a verse to us, this very important verse, Deuteronomy 30:14. This thing is very near to you. What thing? Torah and mitzvot. It's very near to you. It's very possible. It's in your mouth. It's in your heart to do it, that you should be able to do it. Enough that you can do it. You could really live this Torah observant life and reap the blessings therein. The Alter Rebbe, in order to explain this complex verse thoroughly, began with a description of the world, the spiritual aspect of the world, the physical aspect of the world, and our spiritual composition, right? We have a soul. The soul has 10 faculties. The soul has 3 garments, etc., etc. And we talked a little bit about the structure of the world. We spoke a little bit about this concept of the husks and shells of the world, right? These kind of hinder part apparitions of God's will. Do we know what this is called? Klipot. Klipot, husks and shells. I guess I kind of gave you the description, but what's a good one-liner for Klipot? Or the Sitra Achra?
Evil inclination. It's
materialism. You know, there's impure Klipot, and these try to get you to do all kinds of negative things. There's all kinds of temptations in the world, another piece of dessert, or God forbid something evil. And then there's Klipat Noga, right, which is just the mundane everyday stuff of life. Eating, working, shopping, sleeping.
The other side is what?
The Shalosh Klipot Hatameo, the 3 impure husks and shells, right?
Okay.
This is where things...
totally opposed to the holy things.
I guess you could say that. However, we studied in great depth that everything, Hashem Echad, right? God is one. Everything comes from God. So where does mundane stuff or even evil stuff fit into this divine plane, did we learn already?
That's from the hinder.
The hinder part, right? This is from the
hinder,
back.
Hinder.
The back part of God's energy, right?
You say tomato, I say tomato.
Okay. As long as we're not late for dinner, we'll be in good shape. So, we discussed last week, I believe we told a little tale about how I got lost in the Albany Mall when I was a kid. It's very difficult to recognize someone from the back part, right? Very easy to recognize someone from the face. Even my own father, right? I was not able to recognize him from the back at my tender young age of
5.
God only knows what, 5. Baruch Hashem for pulling me out of that. So when we talk about the hinder part of God's will, this is the klipot and the sitra achra. It's like working, right? We don't work because we love to work generally, right? We work because we're looking for money so that we could do the things that we want, like build a family and eat, etc. And that's what the klipot and the sitra achra are. It's a medium with which God can interact with us in such a way to accomplish what he wants, which is a personal relationship, right? So that's the klipot. Then in the next section, the Alter Rebbe discusses and describes in some detail the concept of the Beinani, the Rasha, and the Tzaddik, right? Different levels of where people can be here. And he gave us a hint, he gave us a clue, he spoke and he said, what is it that the Beinani has? The secret weapon of the Beinani, right? The Beinani doesn't sin. How is it possible that the Beinani doesn't sin even though he's flooded with these temptations every day? It's the secret weapon of the Beinani. This is also a test.
The secret weapon of the Beinani is
Mind over matter.
Mind over matter. If you are a thinking person with a brain in your head, a brain on your head on your shoulders, then you will be able to think and contemplate and meditate about God, assuming you have the background about who God is and at least a little bit, that you could think about God enough not to sin, right? So it's in your mouth, it's in your heart, enough to do it. Mm-hmm. And then we discussed, well, what happens if there's somebody who maybe, God forbid, doesn't have the IQ or the EQ or the background or the wherewithal or the knowledge to be able to contemplate God on this level, right? What if? Well, this person can access this other type of connection to God.
The hidden love. The
hidden love that exists within the heart of every Jew and Jewess, right? We talked about the hidden love. Where does the hidden love come from and how does it activate?
Comes from the patriarchs.
Comes from the patriarchs.
And it activates if you are threatened with something that you know that is a sin to bow down or whatever, you take the bullet.
That's exactly
crisis of faith.
A crisis of faith, right. So this hidden love is an inheritance from our patriarchs. Because they were total chariots to God, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had no will of their own. They only ever did what God wanted them to do. They didn't have any agenda of their own. And as such, they bequeathed to us this Jewish soul, right? And this Jewish soul has this hidden love within it that will activate at a moment of crisis of faith in such a way as to say, even if I didn't fast on Yom Kippur last year, I'm as Jewish as the next guy, I won't do that because I know that that's going to separate me from God, and I don't want to do that, right? And that's the fear that's contained within the hidden love, right? I want to be close to my Father in heaven. I don't want to be away from Him, okay? So in this next section, when we're talking about this hidden love, the Alter Rebbe is describing about what we just spoke about a little second ago, Achdut Hashem, the oneness of God, the fact that we're all connected to Him, that everything's connected to Him, even evil, God forbid, right? Mm-hmm. And we said, why is it that God creates evil in the world, and how is it that God creates evil in the world? If God is Tov U'Meitiv, right, He is good and He does good, then how is this that I can see evil in the world? I can see evil in the world, right? How is that possible from my perspective? Why does God create evil in the world? To give us free choice and to enable reward and punishment. Mm-hmm. How does He create evil in the world? Tzimtzum, concealment, contraction. When God hides Himself so much, you don't even see light anymore. It just looks like darkness, right?
From our perspective.
From our perspective, right. So when we're in this mix here and we're trying to activate the hidden love, the Alter Rebbe is building up and will conclude at chapter crescendo, at chapter 25, and he'll say that this hidden love is accessed through a crisis of faith. And that'll happen whether you're knowledgeable or not, right? It has nothing to do with your intellect. It's an essential part of every Jew. So how do you get to access it even when you're not in a crisis of faith? That's what the Alter Rebbe is leading up to, and chapter 24 is our gateway to get there. Last week in chapter 23, well, let's read the title and the summary here from chapter 24 before we go into chapter 23. This week's chapter 24, the title from our handy-dandy map of Tanya, is Sin and Separation from God. The title is Sin and Separation from God. And the short summary here for chapter 24 is as follows. There is no gradation in sin with regard to the sinner's complete separation from God at the moment of that sin. So, at the moment that you're sinning, you are totally separated from God, kind of like that Luke 16 concept with this big chasm. Totally separated from God at the moment of the sin. What happens after the sin? You do teshuvah, and you're no longer disconnected from God in that way, right? But during that moment, it doesn't matter if it was murder, theft, or idol worship. Whatever the situation was, you're equally as disconnected from God. Even lighting a fire on Shabbos.
Sin separates us.
All sin makes this, if you pardon the expression, iron curtain between us and God, right? So that's chapter 24. and that's what we're getting into tonight. Last week in chapter 23, we talked about Mashiach's chapter, right? Which is all about Torah and mitzvot. And it talked about God's face, right? If you want to get to God's face so that you could recognize him and see him and all this stuff, how do you do it?
Mitzvah.
Torah and mitzvot, absolutely. That's why it's the Mashiach's chapter, right? Because Mashiach is Torah.
So let me ask you this.
Sure.
Somebody who doesn't follow mitzvah, and it is not their way. You know what I'm saying? It's a lifestyle. It's
like a Gentile or like a...
Well, anybody. When Mashiach comes, will they recognize him?
Well, that's a really huge point that you've hit on. Absolutely. I mean, on the one hand, if you're not immersed in Torah and mitzvot, anything supernatural that happens is probably a shock to you, right? That's one. Two,
Just not say every eye shall see.
Every eye shall see, absolutely. And that's the concept of Gal Einai, as it says in King David in the Psalms.
I mean, Zechariah is very specific that all Jews, or all of Israel,
Right.
will recognize him. But it says elsewhere, every eye shall see.
Every eye will see, right? Every knee will bow. That's absolutely true. And there will be this big opening of the eyes, awakening moment. And this really isn't the forum for that kind of a thing, but it's a personal change, right? Mashiach coming is a global change, but it involves a personal change. That's why Mashiach is the goal of the Torah, that we should all change to be able to see God everywhere as he is right now. Though we can't see it because we're too immersed in materialism, in these klipot, right? So, in one sense, you have a lot of people out there who believe in Yeshua HaMashiach.
Working.
Right? No.
Nice.
Lots of people out there believe in Yeshua HaMashiach as the promised Messiah of Israel who will has come and will return as Mashiach to be Mashiach ben David,
Ben
right?
David,
The one who's going to come and do everything that we expected him to do. Be king.
That we
right?
wanted, yeah.
When that,
Judge and rule and reign.
right. When that moment happens, and every eye sees when he comes riding on the clouds, or however it's going to be, right? These people who claim to worship him, right? These people who claim to know Mashiach, these people who claim to be part of the system, part of the olive tree of Israel, right? Are they going to recognize him? Because he's going to come down probably as a curly-haired, tzitzit wearing, tefillin tying, kosher eating, Shabbos observant Jew, and
Lion of the tribe of Judah.
Lion of the tribe of Judah, right?
Gonna
So are they going to recognize him?
different.
The answer is yes. This is going to be part of that Gal Einai experience. Oh, that's what it
But
was.
many with
Boy, have I wasted my
mouth
time.
wide open.
Right. So how much easier will it be to recognize God and his plan for the universe if we engage in Torah mitzvot today? Right? And that's kind of the point. So this is how we know about God through Mashiach. What is Mashiach? He's a Torah. Torah and mitzvot, right? The Torah is God's wisdom, and it's inseparable from God any more than you could separate my wisdom from me, right? So God gives us 248 positive mitzvot for the Jews, right? The Gentiles have 7 ways that they can connect to God, and as we spoke, I believe, a little last week before we got cut off, those branch into many, many different ways. Many different ways. For example, one of the 7 Noahide laws is to establish a system of government, right? So every time a Gentile is out there, and it applies to Jews as well, and you're following the speed limit, for example, you're doing a mitzvah for God. Did you know that? How much more careful will you be now? But, it's all good.
5 mile per hour allowance, right?
I'm saying, if you want to gamble with that, you know. So when you follow the law of the land, you're following God, because God has set these systems up, right? And establishing a system of government is one of the 7 Noahide laws. So as you can see, that one law branches into many. For example, with Jews, it says don't work on Shabbos, right? When Shabbos comes, there's 39 prohibited labors, right? It branches off to all these things. So we all have ways that we can connect to God, and by doing that, we are going to more clearly know about him. That will improve our life, and that will pave the way for the coming of Mashiach to end all pain and suffering forever. So that was last week. This week in chapter 24, we're talking about the other, not the 248 positive ways that we can connect to God, but the 365 negative ways that we could run away from God if we don't hold it in. The imagery that the sages give us is 248 limbs of the king, right? What does a limb do? It reaches out and grasps that which you're looking to grasp at. L'chaim. And the 365 prohibitions correlate to the gidim, it says. These are the veins and sinews, or the arteries and blood vessels and ligaments of the body, right? What's the purpose of a blood vessel? It holds that life-giving energy where it needs to be, and it doesn't let it spill all over the place. Same thing with a sinew, right? It holds the bones in place so they don't fly off all over the place. Mm-hmm. So when you engage in sin, you are separated from God. And we have our logical mind, and the spirit of folly that comes to us tells us, oh, this isn't going to separate me from God, but the reality is all of them do. So in chapter 24, we're going to investigate a couple of different tricks that the spirit of folly might use against you to make you think that you're not going to be disconnected from God, even though it's very far from the truth.
Did God really say?
Right. The same argument for the serpent in the garden all the time. Yeah. Did God really say you have to do that? And in chapter 25, the Alter Rebbe is going to wrap it all together, and he's going to say, if you can realize that this hidden love is powerful enough to get you to run from sin and run to God, if you can activate it when you have a crisis of faith, if you can just realize with this little tool that any sin separates you from God as much as a crisis of faith would, then you can activate the hidden love at any time and never sin. Your life will be blessed, Mashiach will come faster, everything happens good. Yeah? Mm-hmm. So that's our progression, that's where we came from and where we're going to. With that as our lengthy, and I apologize, introduction, who would like to begin reading?
Antithetically, the
nice and loud, please.
Antithetically, the 365 prohibited commandments of the Torah, as well as rabbinic injunctions, since they are contrary to his will and wisdom, blessed be he, and indeed the very opposite thereof, represent total and complete separation from his unity and oneness, blessed be he, the same as the Sitra Achra and Kalipa, which are called Avodah Zara, idolatry, and other gods, because the hiding of the countenance of the supernal will, as explained above.
So, let's just take a look at that really quick. We're talking about the concept of God's face. These are the mitzvot. And the hinder part, these are the klipa, right? Mm-hmm. So when I don't choose the mitzvah, which is God's face, which is Mashiach, and I do choose the klipot, or the Sitra Achra, the other side, the hinder part, the opposite of holiness, that which stands seemingly opposed to holiness, though everything comes from the same source. If you cast your vote for that, as opposed to what God wants you to do, this is called idol worship. How could you make such a bold statement and say it's idol worship? I just lit a fire on Shabbos. It's not that big a deal, right? The fact of the matter is, when you choose something other than God's perfect will, you're choosing the place where all idolatry receives its sustenance from. Because you're serving yourself over God. You made an idol of yourself. Right. Is exactly right. Mm-hmm. Just like Adam did, right? Adam said, I rather am going to do this instead of what God said, right? Mm-hmm. I'm going to choose me or whatever the situation was. It's complex.
You know, the thing about the adversary, the Satan,
sure.
Right or wrong, that he is attributed with the source of that original sin of pride.
Okay, yeah, sure. Selfishness. Any kind of selfishness.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
In that scripture, which is very debated, but
right.
You know,
right. There's a lot going on there, and we'll go on a nice rabbit trail if we enter there. But the general idea is that which is not God's perfect will, but the hinder part of his will, which is the klipot and sitra achra, that's the source of all of these negative energies that plague our lives. Mm-hmm. So when you choose the selfish thing, and that's a good rule of thumb, a good heuristic, the litmus test is, if this is a selfish thing, it's probably not a godly thing, right? So when you make that choice, A, you make yourself an idol, so that's how the Alter Rebbe's right here, or B, you're getting your energy and you're cleaving to and becoming a chariot for all of the klipot and the sitra achra, all the hinder part of God's will, as opposed to the paninion,
all
as
the
opposed
bad
to the face.
Energy as opposed to the good energy.
And therefore you're cleaving and becoming a chariot to all of the chaos in your life that you can't stand. Mm-hmm. So that's why it's a very important paragraph.
Likewise, the three garments of the nefesh stemming from the kalipo noga in Jews, namely thought, speech, and action, are clothed in the 365 prohibitive commands of the Torah, or in the rabbinic injunctions, as also the essence of the nefesh itself, which pervades these garments, all become actually united with the said sitra achra and kalipa, called avodah zarah.
And avodah zarah means idolatry. Literally, it means alien service, right? This is not the homey service, right? This is the weird, strange, outside alien. This is the hinder part service.
Now, Just a little fine point.
Sure.
That statement seemed to add the rabbinic injunctions to the 613
prohibitions.
mitzvot.
Yes.
It is an addition or actually an elaboration, because basically the rabbinic injunctions establish halakha, how to observe the 613.
Very true. That's in general the oral law, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, above and beyond that, the rabbis have constructed 7 rabbinic mitzvot and a wide array of fences to keep us away from those.
Right.
Uh,
the Great Assembly.
Right, like if this is you going about to fall off the edge of the world, let's put a fence so that you don't get that close, right?
Right.
That is what is being mentioned here, rabbinic injunctions, right? So that's why it's included with the 365 prohibitions, because the sages are always going to make a mitzvah more strict to keep you away from the actual line, right?
So it was alien what?
Alien service.
Service. That's powerful.
Avodah Zarah is a terrible thing.
Furthermore, they become subordinate and secondary to it, the Kalipo.
Who is they? They become
service.
Subordinate?
That's the garments of thought, speech, and action.
Right, your soul.
Oh.
Your soul and the garments of your soul become secondary to the forces of impurity themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You're more powerful than
Mm-hmm.
the force of impurity, but when you subjugate yourself and make yourself a vehicle for the forces of impurity,
then you're overcome.
Yeah, I mean, you just open the door.
Mm-hmm. And considerably...
Service.
And considerably...
Service?
That's Avodah Zarah, alien service. Yeah.
And considerably inferior, that's okay, and more debased than it. For
considerably inferior and more debased than it. And this is exactly what King David said when he said, I'm like a worm, right? Mm. The worm does what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to wiggle around and do whatever it's supposed to do. And it didn't disobey God, right? Humans are the only ones with free choice. So when you subordinate yourself and make yourself secondary to this Avodah Zarah, to this Sitra Achra, to this Klipa, to this hinder part of God's will, to not the countenance of his energy, then even the forces of impurity, right? Even a pagan idol is doing what God designed it to do, to be a stumbling block or whatever, right? And you are less than it because it's doing its job. And you have failed your job, right? That's why it says more debased than it. And that's why David said, I'm like less than a worm. Because even a gnat does what it's supposed to do.
Well, the next thing, for the klipa are not clothed in a corporal body.
Right, that's spiritual energies.
And so there is no rebelliousness.
You can't have rebelliousness unless you have a physical body, right? And a human soul to power it. Right?
And the act of, or the power of volition, the act to exercise free will.
Free will, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that comes with the body package, as we know from the story of the Nephilim.
And it knows its master and is not rebellious against him by any independent act of sending its evil messengers, God forbid, when not commissioned by the omnipresent, blessed be he.
And this is very similar to
Balaam's statement.
Yeah, well, right before then, just look at the first chapter of Job, right? God told Satan how far he could go, when he could go that far, and it's totally subservient to God, right? Even the forces of impurity are subservient to God.
Well,
we are the only ones that can't be. I think we asked a question last week, what's the most evil creation in all of the universe?
Man.
Yeah, that was the answer we came up with, Oh, you think like a statue or, something like that? No. It's us, right? Because the gold does what the gold was designed to do. It's supposed to hold its form or whatever, The Satan does what the Satan's supposed to do. It's supposed to tempt us. We are supposed to hold the line and not fall to that temptation, and we fail. That makes us the most evil things in the universe. May God forgive us and protect us.
I cannot go beyond the word of God.
That's what Balaam says.
Right.
Balaam.
And even though it is called Avodah Zarah, he is at least acknowledged as the God of gods, and the latter are utterly powerless to contravene his will. Blessed be he, for they know and apprehend that he is their life and sustenance, since they derive their nurture from the so-called hindermost part of the will of the Supreme One. Blessed be he, who encompasses them.
So, in the example of Balaam here, Balaam was a man with a free will in a body, but when he was engaged in the act of prophecy, right? He was no longer a free will, right?
Right.
When God gives you a prophecy and it's coming through you, you're a vehicle. You're a chariot, right? You're not going to be free will at that point, right? So that's why Bilam said, even though Bilam worshipped idols and did occult practices and all kinds of nasty and negative stuff, still he said, when the Spirit is flowing, I will not be able to transgress the will of the Holy One, blessed be He, right? The only one who can is a human, again, when he's not engaged in that kind of level of prophecy.
Okay, what was it?
All of the forces of impurity, they draw their sustenance from the hindermost part of the supreme will of the Holy One, blessed be He, which encompasses them all. They know where they get their energy from, and it comes from God.
As it were in exile within them, that they presume to regard themselves...
Oh, you back up to it is only, I believe.
It is only because of their sustenance and inner life source, or as it were in exile within them, that they presume to regard themselves as gods, which is a denial of His unity.
So the fact of the matter is, no matter how many times you shake it or turn it or look at it, the root, source, core essence, and energy of vitality that's holding these forces of impurity in existence comes from God, right? God makes everything. As such, they have the koach to be able to say, I may be an independent entity, but as a spiritual form, they have no power to rebel. And they recognize that, right? Because they know where they suckle their life source from.
Nevertheless, they are not so completely heretical as to deny God, to assert that He does not exist, only they regard Him as the God of gods, recognizing that their life and existence are ultimately derived and bestowed upon them from His will, blessed be He. Therefore, they are never rebellious against His will, blessed be He.
And we go on and on all night looking at examples as to how the force of impurity cannot rebel against God. Because they come from Him, right? God is everything. You think when you stubbed your toe, that's because somebody shoved you? You think that somebody cut you off in traffic, that's because that person was a bad guy? All these things happen to you specifically because God designed them to happen to you, right? Are we getting the message? Are we listening to what God has to say to us, right? Or are we being rebellious and stubborn and spiteful?
If this be so, then the person who opposes His will, blessed be He, is exceedingly inferior to and more debased, and the Sitra Akra and the Kalipo called Avodah Zara and strange gods. He is completely sundered from His unity and oneness, even more than they, as though denying His unity more radically than they, God forbid.
Again, painting the picture that we are way more evil than the forces of impurity when we sin, right? Because where they recognize God, that God is, they also recognize their place, and they do their job. We don't even think about God. We just think about the materialism and the klipo, and we engage in that without ever thinking about God. That's way worse than what they're doing. Way worse than what they're doing.
So you're saying that when we rebel against God, we are more evil than the Satan.
Absolutely true. 100%.
Because at least he's doing his job.
Because he's doing his job. God told him to tempt and to test and to be the harlot, right? We are told to resist that, and you didn't. Right? God forbid. May God protect us and forgive us.
Compare what is written in Eschayim, Portal 42, end of chapter 4, that the evil which is in the material world is the dregs of the coarse kalipo, hence the ultimate in the purifying process. I saw the weirdest little thing that I thought was so profound. Again, I love words because just a little tiny phrase will remind you all the time. Did you forget why you were here?
Right.
We're not here for anything other than to do His will, do the corrections, do what we were sent to do, fulfill your purpose, get back on track, and do what you need to do. Did you forget why you were here?
Absolutely.
Brilliant.
And I mean, look at our example back in the beginning about going to work, right? If the klipa are to God as work is to us, going to work is to us, then as we are looking for the paycheck, so also God is looking for the relationship, right? As such, when we get lost and we forget why we're here and we don't see it and we just get caught up in the materialism and we work to make money to get more money to get more money.
And you're just miserable and stressed and pressured and it's horrible.
How tragic.
For selfish.
For selfish reasons.
Well, because then you've made it's idolatry.
How tragic a mistake is that? And we think we're doing so good by being, making all this money for our families. And you know what? The kids would probably rather have you in the house with them. Right?
And a pot with a couple of wooden spoons.
Yeah, there's that.
Hence the ultimate in the purifying process. Therefore, the worldly things severe and evil, and the wicked prevail in it. This explains the commentary of our sages of blessed memory on the verse, if any man's wife turns aside, that no person commits any transgression unless the spirit of folly has entered into him.
And this is from the tractate in the Talmud Sota, famous tractate. And the idea here, we've talked about the spirit of folly before. What is that? Ruach Shtut. What is the spirit of folly?
Stupidity.
Okay. Please elaborate.
It's a thing, though.
It's a spiritual force of impurity, of negativity that comes to us. Okay? So that's a good start. What does it do when it gets to us?
Wreaks havoc.
How?
Makes you do something that you would not normally do.
What,
it's
it
a
holds its hand over your hand and pulls the trigger? Is that how it works?
No, but it's the same thing as Satan, kind of. It's like it just kind of... And you're like, hey, it's a lollipop. And then you do something stupid.
I think it was Charles Spurgeon that said, it's not that we decide to rebel against God.
Right.
But that spirit of folly fills us with a forgetfulness of God.
Right. Okay. That we're definitely honing in on the right track here. So let me connect the dots.
I mean, at that time, that we choose to sin.
Totally true. The spirit of folly comes to us and says, so what? You took a little money from the register. So what? You said something negative about somebody. So what? I lit a fire on Shabbos. The spirit of folly is going to whisper in your ear and say, you're not going to get disconnected from God for that. It's so nothing, right? God is going to forgive you. It's going to be fine. Don't worry about doing the mitzvah because God's always going to be with you and He doesn't really care what you do, right? Those are lies. God is with us all the time, yes, but He does care about what we do, absolutely. And if we do a sin, we are separated from Him, right? So the main thing I want you to remember when the spirit of folly, when you talk about the spirit of folly, it comes to us and tells us we won't be separated from God when we do this sin. That's the main thing you need to remember for spirit of folly. It tells us we're not going to be separated from God, and that's a lie.
For even an adulterous woman with a frivolous nature could have controlled her passionate drive were it not for the spirit of folly in her which covers, obscures, and conceals the hidden love of her divine soul yearning to cleave to her faith in God in His unity and oneness, not to be parted, God forbid, even at the cost of her life, from His unity by idolatrous worship. God forbid, be it only by an outward acknowledgement without any belief at all in her heart.
So it's a trick. You know, that's not really what her soul believes. That she really inside, she's a Jew, which means she probably wants to cleave to God. She wants to be with God. She is afraid to be away from God, right? However, the spirit of folly comes and says, you're not going to be disconnected from Him, right? This is just a little thing. It's not like some other thing. It's not like idolatry, right? It's not like there's a gold statue here and someone's telling you to kiss it. At the same point, that same person, if she were, God forbid, faced with a crisis of faith that made her think that she was going to be separated from God, like having to kiss a gold statue, then she would make the hidden love choice. The hidden love exists within her, right? And it would pop out and it would say, absolutely not. Even though I just did a sin yesterday, I'm not going to be disconnected from God today because I know that this disconnects me from God. Spirit of folly comes and tells us this adultery, you're not going to be disconnected from God for that. You know, maybe a slap on the wrist. I don't know. You know? That's a lie.
Surely she would subdue the temptation and lust of adultery, which is lighter suffering than death. May God protect us.
And look at the exclamation mark here. I mean, yes, God should definitely protect us. But look at this is drama, right? This same person has the hidden love within her, and she could literally, and this could be anybody, this is just one example from the Torah, but literally she could subdue this temptation and lust, etc., because the hidden love exists within her. It just was covered momentarily by a little something called the Ruach Shtut, right, this spirit of folly. And may God protect us, because how easy is that to think, oh yeah, this isn't going to disconnect me from, it's not like I'm worshiping idols or anything.
Right. But the distinction she makes between the interdict against adultery and that against bowing to an idol is also but a spirit of folly stemming from the Kalipa, which envelopes the divine soul up to but not including its faculty of chokhmah.
Up to but not including its faculty of chokhmah. There's a whole long diatribe and stuff about, the klipot and the 4 worlds and all the sphirot there, and where do you find the klipot, where do you not find the klipot? Okay, so on the hinder part of Yetzirah you'll find klipot, but not on the, or in the hinder part of Bria rather, but not on the countenance part. Our world is totally covered in klipot, which is why evil can exist here in the strength that it does. But not up to chokhmah. Wisdom is the water that puts out the fire of the spirit of folly, right? Because if you sit somebody down and tell them, hey, guess what? When you commit adultery, you are just as, what we're doing right here, you're just as disconnected from God. That person's wisdom should light up and say, I don't want to do the adultery then, right?
Because of the divine light that is clothed in that faculty,
in chokhmah,
as mentioned above.
Right. Remember we talked about chokhmah is the potentiality of what is, right? This is has nothing of itself. It just wants to find a way to serve God. And that's what chokhmah is, and that's why it functions in this manner.
The real truth, however, is that even in the case of a minor sin, the offender transgresses against the will of the Supreme One, blessed be He, and is completely sundered from His unity and oneness, blessed be He, even more than the Sitra Achra and the Kalipa called strange gods in idolatry, and then all things that are derived therefrom in this world, namely the unclean cattle and beasts, the unclean birds, and the abominable insects and reptiles, to quote.
So before you quote, let's just repeat that sentence one time. If you are an underliner or a highlighter, this is probably the one. And I'll just read it real quick. This is the point of chapter 24. The real truth, however, is that even in the case of a minor sin, the offender transgresses against the will of the Supreme One, blessed be He. And he's completely sundered. What is sundered? Cut away and separated from His unity, God's unity and oneness. May God be blessed. Even more so than the Sitra Achra, which is the other side of holiness. Even more so than the Kalipot, which are all of these forces of mundanity or even evil. Even more than strange gods. Even more than idolatry. And even more than all the detestable things that are derived therefrom in this world. Such as all of the unkosher animals. All of the bugs and stuff. You're more unclean than creepy crawlies when you, even a minor sin, transgress. That's important, right? If you can remember that, then chapter 25 is going to tell you your hidden love should be able to function. If you remember that before you have a minor sin.
To quote, the gnat was created ahead of you, man, which means that even the gnat, which consumes but does not excrete, and is the lowest Kalipa and the most distant from holiness, poor gnats, which bestows benevolence, even at the greatest distance, precedes the sinful man in the descending gradation and flow of life from the will of the Supreme One, blessed be He. Well, that's a hard day right there.
That's a hard day. So the idea here is that even a gnat was created before mankind, right? So that should kind of get us to wake up right there. The idea here that the gnat consumes but it doesn't give out. Gnats are one of those insects that are just totally useless to mankind, right? There are other creatures that eat, gnats, and they kind of, but it's going to be like little spiders and things that we can't use anyways,
Their purpose
right?
Just to go around gas station lights.
Yeah, and other things like that, This is something that just feels very useless to us, right? So the imagery that we're looking for here is selfishness, right? Selfishness is the root of the Sitra Achra, the other side. It's the hinder part of God's will. Anytime you take, and you never give out, this is selfishness, this is evil, right? And you fall lower than a gnat when you engage like this, because the gnat is, again, doing his job and was created ahead of you, by the way, man. So, step up, huh?
I'm thinking. Hold on. Here we go. Okay. Blessed be He. All the more. So the other unclean living creatures and even the fierce beasts, all of which do not deflect from their purpose but obey His command.
Right, the lion is designed to roar and maul and eat up gazelles and stuff like that, right? It's doing its job.
Even though they cannot perceive it. To quote further, and the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, elicitating the commentary of our sages of blessed memory, that no evil beast defies a human being unless he appears to it like an animal.
So let's just take a look there.
So you can only get eaten by a lion if you've been nothing but a nasty sinner and you look like something smaller.
Like lunch,
right? So the idea here is the verse, and the fear of you and the dread of you should be upon every beast of the earth. This was said to Adam and Eve, right? This is back from Genesis. What happened that's not the case anymore, right? Rabbi Gordon tells a cute story about the anti-Semitic dog, right? Who this guy has a really Jew-hating dog for some reason. And they say, a new Jew came in town and he was like, watch out for this dog. This guy's got a Jew-hating dog. It's like, oh, don't worry about it. I have a verse. I have a pasuk from the Torah. And I could say this pasuk and every animal cowers in fear before me. He's like, oh, this is very good. Okay, So he goes out. He comes back an hour later.
Verse, right?
I don't know. You never hear the verse. So anyways, he comes back an hour later. There's not a piece of clothing on him that's not torn. He's cut. He's bleeding all over. He should lose it in Zahargit, as Rabbi Gordon might say. And he said, what about your verse? Didn't you have the verse? And he was like, this dog, he doesn't even let you say the verse. Right? So...
That's cute.
The animals are not always afraid of us in our reality. Why is that? It goes back to the garden with Adam and Eve, right? God said to Adam, don't do this. Adam said, I'm going to put myself above God. I'm going to make myself the idol. I'm going to act selfishly, right? I'm going to make the not restricting decision. And as such, he messed up the whole balance of creation. So now animals are like, well, if he can go above God, I can go above him, right? He looks like a great snack.
He looks like a treat, a tasty treat.
So that's the whole, this coming together, right? And the sages say, no evil beast defies a human being unless it appears to be like an animal. What's an animal? Someone who has debased himself in this take, and never give 100%. Format.
While confronting the righteous, from whose face the divine image never departs, the evil beasts are humble before them, as it is stated in the Zohar of Daniel in the lion's den. So that's why Daniel didn't get eaten.
That's why Daniel didn't get eaten, because his face always reflected God's face. And I want to hit this really hard for a second. Why did Daniel's face look like God's face?
Does God have a 3 times a day?
Does God have a face? The answer is no. God does not have any kind of image. You were shown no image on the mountain. So why does Daniel's face look like God's face then?
Because he radiates God's light.
Because he's living with him all the time. He's always a chariot to him, right? Mm-hmm. How does the functionality of that? He's always doing Torah and mitzvahs. He's always studying Torah as often as he can. He's doing every mitzvah that he can whenever he can. Like you said, he prays 3 times a day. Mm-hmm. So what does this mean?
So God doesn't have a face.
Right.
It's an anthropomorphism.
Right.
But Daniel
Torah speaks in the language of man.
The light of the Ein Sof.
Just like Moses. Just like Moses did.
Moses' face shine, right. Because Daniel's face, all that was projecting his from him and receiving from him was God's countenance,
right?
Not the hinder part, the countenance. Mm-hmm. So let's fast forward into the New Testament. In the Brit, you look at Yeshua says, if you've seen me, you've seen the face of the Father, right? Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
It means he's a mirror image of the same thing.
Because he's always focused on God's will. We go back to John 5, right? I can't do anything except what my Father in heaven tells me to do, right? Mm-hmm. And as such, this is the channel that allows for all of this functionality to happen, right? Mm-hmm. So the face of God is not someone who looked like whatever Yeshua HaMashiach looked like back then. That's not the point. The point is, his face looked like God's face because he's always reflecting Torah and mitzvah, which is why Mashiach is Daniel times 1,000, because he is the Torah and the mitzvah, right? Because he is God's will, because he never diverts from it even one little bit. Mm-hmm. So when you see people who say, oh yeah, now we have Jesus, so we don't have to do any mitzvahs anymore, you totally missed the whole Bible, right? The entire Bible you just missed by saying that there's one mitzvah that you don't have to do, right? Mm-hmm. Because the Messiah, who is the goal of all the Torah and God's perfect will, reflects nothing but perfect Torah observance and mitzvah observance. Torah and mitzvah observance. That's what the face is.
It is therefore clear that he who sins and transgresses against his will, blessed be he, even in a minor offense, is at the time he commits it more completely removed from the supreme holiness, namely his unity and oneness, blessed be he, than all the unclean living creatures and abominable insects and reptiles which derive their sustenance from the Sitra Achra and the Khalifa of idolatry.
Right.
As for the principle that saving a life overrides certain prohibitions...
So now, just as a short introduction, what the Alter Rebbe is going to do, he's going to go and he's going to say, really? How do you say really in Hebrew? Be'emet, right? Really? Because we know that there are differences in sins, right? certain things there's you can't punish for. Certain things there's a death penalty for, God forbid. It seems like it's different for us, right? Certain things we're supposed to give up our life for, certain things we're not. So how do these fit into everything we just learned? And that's going to be the remainder of this chapter.
Okay.
Kosh.
And the circumstances when the law calls for the commission of a transgression so as to escape death. This is in accordance with the explanation of our sages of blessed memory that the Torah declares, violate one Shabbat for him that he may observe many Shabbats. And not because of the relative leniency
yeah,
or gravity of sin, of the sins.
Right, that's not the purpose, right? I just want to hit this like a little bit. So there are 3 sins we're commanded to give up our life for, right? And the rest we're commanded to break the mitzvah to save a life, right? What are the 3 sins that we need to give up our life for? Idol worship. This is a test, yeah. Adultery, sexual immorality.
And murder.
And murder, right? Someone puts a gun to your head and says, kill this guy or I'm going to kill you. You take the bullet. Mm-hmm. Someone puts a gun to your head and says, do this immoral sexual thing. You take the bullet. Mm-hmm. Someone puts a gun to your head and says, you kiss the idol. We know the hidden love's going to come out and say, I'm a Jew like the next guy. I'll take the bullet. God forbid. May God protect us from any of these things. Mm-hmm. So when any other mitzvah, the idea is save the life, right? If I'm dying in the wilderness and I'm lost and all that's there is a wild boar to eat the pig. To save your life, absolutely eat the pig.
A little bacon, it'll be okay.
It's a funny joke I heard from Rabbi Gordon the other day, if you'll permit it. There was a Jew who went to the house of a Gentile clergyman.
Oh,
and, yeah, you heard that one. Mm-hmm. And the guy comes in and he's like, he's offering him all this stuff. He's like, here, try this...
pork roast.
Yeah, try this shrimp wrapped bacon thing, and and then he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't eat that. It's it's not kosher." And then he's like, brings out the pork chops, like, "Try this."
It's not kosher in a couple ways.
Yeah, yeah. And he's like, "I'm sorry, I can't eat that. My religion, And then he brings the wine, and the wine's not kosher. He's like, "Drink the wine," and he's like, "I'm sorry, I can't drink it. It's not kosher." And the clergyman, finally pulls a gun to the rabbi and he says, "Listen, I'm sick of you. You're gonna drink this wine, or I'm gonna kill you." And the rabbi says, "You had to wait till the wine. You had to wait till the wine, right? You couldn't have started with that. You're allowed to break kosher laws. You're allowed to break Shabbat law if you have to save a life, right?"
Okay. This is supported by the fact that the violation of Shabbat is extremely grave and comparable with the idolatry in relation to the law of animal slaughtering by one who is a habitual transgressor of any particular Jewish precept. Well, you guys are on it, aren't you?
Hey.
As codified in your Adeh sect 2. Unlike the case of one whose particular willful sin is that of incest, nevertheless, when it is a question of saving a life, the prohibition of Shabbat are suspended, but never those of incest.
Right.
Rather, it is a scriptural decree.
Mm-hmm. So again, we're going through different things here. We're talking about the concept of a shochet, right? Someone who engages in the act of being a shochet, a ritual, you make the kosher meat, right? For that kind of a person, you have to have certain things in line there, right? You need to make sure that your shochet is extraordinarily observant, because you're trusting him with your food, right? So one of those things you look for is...
that the knife has not one nick.
And everything else that goes with it. There's hundreds of laws there. So you need to make sure that the shochet observes Shabbat, for example, because that's a good way to tell if he's going to... Because he does this, but he's going to drive on Shabbat, for example. Mm-hmm. Then you can't... What if he's going to cut a corner when it comes to cutting your meat? Right? You can't trust him.
Mm-hmm. Another shochet.
Find another shochet, right. So again, the Alter Rebbe is just kind of comparing and contrasting different laws and different categories, and he says, see, we know that there are some things that are more serious than others. However, any sin separates you from God is unquestionable after we go through the whole list.
After the sinful act, however, if it belongs to the category of sins, the penalty for which is neither correct. Spiritual extinction.
It's the cutting off of the soul. You die young without children, God forbid.
Nor death by divine visitation.
Death from heaven, God forbid.
Category of penalty for which is neither spiritual extinction nor death by divine visitation. I heard the greatest thing. Remember we learned that if you die on your birthday,
it means you completed perfect.
A friend of mine's relative died on his 93rd birthday.
How about that? Baruch Hashem.
Isn't that cool?
You gotta remember his
Yes, that's awesome. Nor death by divine visitation, in which the case of the divine soul does not entirely perish and is not completely cut off from its root in the living God, except that through this sin, its attachment to and connection with its root has been weakened somewhat.
I guess we can. Yeah, it goes on for a while. You want to read the note, I guess?
Okay. According to the extinct.
So we're talking about chorus. This is a parenthesis within the text. We're talking about the punishment of chorus, cutting off the soul, and death by heaven.
According to the extent and specific nature of the blemish thus caused in the soul.
The sin causes a blemish in the soul.
And its root in the upper spheres are the various so-called purifying processes and retributions in purgatory
Gehenna.
or in this world, an appropriate retribution for each transgression and sin, in order to cleanse and remove the stain and blemish. Nor is the blemish always identical in the case of the transgressions punishable by death or spiritual extinction.
Right. So
what does all that mean?
For example,
what are the two things that you have to do to get those things in the first place?
There's a list.
What is
I
it?
think it's like 43 mitzvahs that have the punishment of cutting off of the soul and death by heaven. That works differently. Tanya's going to address that nowadays, but it's not so different really. And the idea that the Alter Rebbe is trying to say here, however, and if you'd like a list of those, I can get them for you. On that list are things like Shabbat, eating sacrificial food in a state of impurity, all the incest, sexual sins, eating chametz on eating chametz on Pesach.
Really? That's a serious thing. Who would have thought
chametz, not chametz. You're allowed to have chametz on Pesach, so long as it's kosher for Pesach. But no chametz, no leavening on Pesach. That could cut off your soul.
Strange fire. We learned that the hard way, didn't we?
Right. Don't mess with incense or any of that stuff. So what the Alter Rebbe is trying to say here is, okay, it looks way different, right? This one's got a punishment of stoning. This one's got a punishment of death by heaven. This one's got a punishment of strangulation, God forbid, right?
Those are those nighttime prayers, though. They cover.
Right. They deal with that kind of stuff. It's talking about this Kabbalistic note, right? The idea is just because there are different methods to cleanse a certain blemish, right? A sin causes a blemish in your soul, God forbid. So you want to get that blemish off. You crash your car, God forbid, and you take it to the body shop, and they're going to bang out the bumper, or they're going to replace a light, or whatever needs to be done based on the damage you dealt to it, right? Mm-hmm. That doesn't change the fact at all that the car is now undrivable because you crashed it, right? Awkward. So even though there are different methods for cleansing a sin, and that's the process. If you find yourself in a situation where you were culpable for the death penalty, right, and you experience that death penalty in this world, that cleansed your soul. You came out good on the other side, right? Who knows if there's other things that you might have to deal with as well. Probably if you got to the point where you need to be punished by death. But all of the things, all of the things equal, that punishment is a cleansing for that thing. The process of chorus, the process of death by heaven, these things are designed specifically to deal with the blemish that you made. That said, any sin separates you from God no matter what, right? Completely at the time of that sin. So that's kind of the purpose of the note. Okay, the blemishes look different, the punishment looks different, it doesn't matter. When you sin, you're separated from God. That's the point. Coach?
In that case, his vitalizing animal soul, which is clothed in the body, and also his body, return and rise from the Sitra Achra and Kalipo and draw closer to the holiness of the divine soul that pervades them, which believes in one God and remains faithful to him even at the time when the sin is committed.
So if you have blemish on you and you scrub all of the blemish off to a point where you're all bare and exposed, what do you find underneath all of that?
You really love God.
You find that you really love. You find the hidden love, right? When all the klipot, all the crusty shells that are on you have been removed, albeit possibly, probably painfully, right? Once they're removed and you're laid bare, what do you find? Even the sinners at the end will say, Amen, you were right, right?
Except that it is in a state of veritable exile.
It's been in a state of exile, right? This divine love, this hidden love within you at the moment of your sin, it's still there, but it's separated from God, and that's this experience of guilt, right?
Within the animal soul of the Sitra Achra, which has caused the body to sin and has dragged it down with itself into the depths of Sheol, far down beneath the defilement of the Sitra Achra and Kalipo of idolatry. May God preserve us.
So the idea is we all carry with us, again, just like the forces of impurity, right? They're energized at some level by God's will. Whether it's in the case of impurity, it's the hinder part of God's will. When it's in the case of us, it's the countenance of God's will, right? We are the purpose of creation. So when we take that godly energy within us and we engage in sin, it's literally like we're taking God within us. You're taking the king's head and you're giving him a swirly in the dirty toilet. And that's not the way to treat a king, right? This is called the exile of the divine presence within us, right? The Jewish people represent the presence of God. And when we are in a case of sin or in a case of exile as we are today, you don't see that. The Jews don't look godly. They look like a people, right? Right? And that's not how we're supposed to look. We're supposed to look like God's emissaries and children here on earth. So we need to lift that divine energy out of the latrine and reestablish it to a place of holiness. This is the concept of the third book of Tanya, Igeret HaTeshuvah, the 12-chapter essay on repentance, where the Alter Rebbe gives us the Kabbalistic interpretation of Teshuvah. Teshuvah means to return. The Kabbalah says, the Zohar says, Tashuv Hey, to return the Hey of God's name, because that little Hey of God's name you have within you, you brought it down into impurity, you need to put it back in its proper place. That's the lower and higher levels of Teshuvah, and with God's help, we'll get there.
What greater exile can there be than this, a plunge from a high roof to a deep pit? For, as it has been previously explained, that the root and source of all Jewish souls is in the supreme wisdom, and he and his wisdom are one and the same. Right. It is comparable, by way of example, to one who seizes a king's head, drags it down, and dips his face in a privy full of filth, from which there is no greater outrage, even if he does it only for a moment. For the Kalipo and the Sitra Achra are called vomit and filth, as is known.
As is well known.
Wow, that's crazy.
So if you can remember that, now chapter 25 is going to, this then is the meaning, and I'm not sure if we'll hit that or not, but in the end of the day, the point here is, if you can remember that, you're putting the king's head into the latrine, right? Even for a moment. Even for a moment, it's the greatest outrage, right? It doesn't matter. I'm just sitting until I get home from driving home from on Shabbat, right? It's just for 20 minutes. That would be a long 20 minutes, right? And God is totally outraged by that. Of course. So if you can remember that, the next time it comes to a minor sin, that any sin is exactly like this. So you plunge in the king's head in the swirly. Then you know not to sin, right? Maybe I shouldn't do that, because in the end of the day, I am connected to God. I am I come from God's chokhmah, right? God's chokhmah is God's wisdom. It's the same place that the Torah and Mashiach come from. I represent this holy line, and I'm engaged in this. I can't possibly be seen doing this. I can't possibly have the stain about this on me. I can't possibly violate my relationship with God in this way. I won't do the sin. That's where we're going in chapter 25.
Okay.
Tough chapter. Some harsh words. What did we learn in chapter 24?
Don't sin.
Don't sin. How many different ways do we got to say it?
Just do it. It's near you. Do it.
All sin is a total separation from the Holy One.
All sin is a total separation from the Holy One. Blessed be He. May God protect us that we should not be able to run away from Him like that.
Amen.
And it's really just selfishness. It's putting us in idolatry above God.
Like
our way and our will above His way and His will.
You know, our friends over at the Kabbalah Center, they say something very similar, right? Like, that's the rule of thumb. If you're taking the selfish choice, you're probably sinning, right? It's probably going to equal a sin.
1%, right.
If not, it could lead you there.
And if you're on the receiving end, chances are you're doing the wrong thing.
What do they say? It's receiving for self alone, right? This is not great. If you want to be filled so that you could pour out, Baruch Hashem, God bless you, go do more of that, right? If you want to be filled so that you could hoard it for yourself, you probably won't find yourself being filled too much more, right? Anything else that stood out?
You know, it's funny. It's the everyday mundane. You think about it, but you don't. But these are strong words.
Mm-hmm.
Like filth and vomit and
we're
toilet.
Trying to give a little
and
wake-up call here,
That's like extreme.
You had mentioned about those who highlighted in the line.
Yeah.
Well, what was
goes right
interesting
across. Yeah. Repeated the same message.
This was restated right across the column from it.
With an intro, a body, and a conclusion.
Yeah, I noticed
Alter
that
Rebbe
too.
was
I wonder why that it did that.
He's trying to get the point across. That's the point of chapter 24. Any sin is equally separating. But this one, the punishment is I just have to pay back a little money, and this one, the punishment is death. Doesn't matter. At that time, you're totally separated from God until you do teshuvah. Right? God forbid. Okay. So, again, in chapter 25, we're going to wrap this up, and the Alter Rebbe is going to say, if you can remember at that moment of sin, right, you're tested on maybe 5 or 7 of these moments a day, right? You're on the precipice, the decisions come your way, selfless godly choice, selfish sinful choice, right? You're right here. The Alter Rebbe is begging you, like Moshe in Deuteronomy, right? Please remember this imagery of the privy of filth.
Choose life.
And choose life, right? Choose the godly choice. And it's not always going to be easy. It's often going to be difficult. But if you can remember that what you're doing to God at the moment of even the most minor of sins, your hidden love should be able to awaken in such a way as to get you not to sin. You're going to feel an emotional response enough to say, I'll find some other way to do it, right? Or something, right? Something. Also a word about the spirit of folly, right? Let's not get tricked. Let's not get tricked. There are voices, and let me tell you, the spirit of folly is a spiritual force, okay? I'm not trying to say that it's not. There are people who are also forces in our lives. All forces come from God. God chooses everything that we hear. That's without question. But there are people who, in this world today, say, you don't have to do that. Go ahead and shave your face. If you're a man, women, they don't have to. That's not a mitzvah for them. But they say, don't bother lighting the Shabbos candles, right? They say, who cares if you speak a little lashon hara about this guy? It's not like it really matters, right? And there are people out there who say this. We need to be strong and not give in to that spirit of folly or that foolish opinion. We need to understand that any sin separates us from God infinitely. And it's tough to come back from that. It's easy because you do teshuvah, but the whole process is very tough for us. So, that's 24. We beat it to death enough? You think so? Good. Very good. Who would like to close us in prayer?
Abby, we thank you and praise you for just opening our eyes, our hearts, and our minds to receive you, your word, your way, and your truth. Help us to live by it and incorporate it in everything we do each and every day. In Yeshua's name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen. Baruch Hashem. Please join us next week, and we'll engage in chapter 25. Again, that's going to close up we'll be done with the first half of the Tanya.
Amen.
Shalom.